The day of the will reading was colder than expected, even for late October. The lawyer's office sat at the corner of a cracked mossy stone building in the old part of town, surrounded by bare trees that looked as if they were grieving too. I stood outside for a moment, staring at the bronze plaque that read, Stokes and Merriman Attorneys at Law. My fingers were clenched inside the sleeves of my oversized wool sweater, a hand-me-down from Grandpa Jack. I hadn't seen my family in over 2 years. They didn't call, didn't visit. The only reason I was even invited to the will reading was because Grandpa Jack made sure my name was in it. And now that he was gone, I was simply a loose thread in a family tapestry they couldn't wait to snip away. Inside the conference room, the air smelled like varnish and old paper. Derek, my half-brother, was already there, sprawled in one of the leather chairs like he owned the place. His wife, Jenna, with her perfect hair and expressionless face, scrolled on her phone. Our Aunt Linda sat across the table, lips pursed so tight I wondered if she ever relaxed. I sat in the farthest chair, avoiding their eyes. No one said hello. Mr. Carson, the family attorney, shuffled in with a thick folder under his arm and cleared his throat. "Let's begin." He started reading the will in that slow, deliberate tone lawyers seem to rehearse. "To my granddaughter, Clara Bennett," he said. "I leave the cabin and the surrounding 10-acre woodland property near Pine Hollow." I blinked. That old cabin, I hadn't seen it since I was a child. It was where Grandpa Jack used to take me camping, just the two of us. We'd roast marshmallows on the porch, and he'd tell me stories about the forest and the creatures he swore lived in it. Before I could even process it, Derek let out a scoff. "You've got to be kidding," he said. "She gets the shack in the middle of nowhere fine. Give her that." "She's not part of this family anyway." I turned to look at him, but he didn't meet my eyes. Jenna giggled softly. Aunt Linda rolled her eyes. Mr. Carson continued. "To Derek Bennett and Linda Morgan, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the main house investment accounts and personal assets." I felt my stomach sink. Grandpa had always said the cabin was special, but compared to a sprawling estate and hundreds of thousands in assets, it sounded more like a joke. Jenna leaned toward Derek and whispered not so quietly, "Well, at least she won't come around asking for anything. Let her live in that dump with the raccoons." That's when Derek turned to me, his tone like ice. "Clara, take the cabin. Go play Forest Princess or whatever you do. Just stay out of our lives." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply stood, thanked Mr. Carson, and walked out. Outside, the cold bit into my cheeks. I got in my old hatchback and sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the dashboard. It was clear whatever family I thought I had died with Grandpa Jack. I had no place in their world anymore. But I still had the cabin. I didn't know it then, but in that moment, I had more than any of them would ever realize. And soon they would come to regret the day they cast me out. The road to Pine Hollow twisted like a ribbon through the forest, bordered by tall pines and moss-covered stones. I hadn't been there since I was 13. Back then, the cabin felt like a hidden kingdom carved out of nature, a place where Grandpa Jack and I shared laughter, secrets, and silence without judgment. Now, 15 years later, it felt like exile. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, dusk was settling in. The porch sagged in the middle, and ivy curled around the wooden railing like a protective serpent. The paint was peeling, and the windows were clouded with time. But something about the quiet felt welcoming. No judgment. No icy stares or whispered mockery. Just wind in the trees and the smell of pine needles. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old paper. Dust hung in the air like fog. The fireplace was exactly where I remembered it, framed by the same stones I used to line up my marshmallows on. I set down my bags and turned on the flashlight. No electricity. No running water. No cell service. I sighed, both overwhelmed and oddly relieved. I spent the next 2 days cleaning, scrubbing every surface, airing out old quilts, and chasing away the spiders that had claimed the corners. As I worked, memories of Grandpa's stories came back to me, his voice echoing through the stillness. He used to say, "This land has roots deeper than blood, Clara. Someday you'll understand." I didn't, not yet. On the third day, I found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards in the bedroom. A small rusted latch that creaked when I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside was a wooden box wrapped in canvas. My breath caught as I lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, I found three things: an old leather journal with my grandfather's initials, a faded topographic map with hand-drawn markings, and a metal key attached to a red string. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. The first page was written in Grandpa Jack's handwriting. Clara, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to the place where things matter. This land has stories, secrets, and truths I never dared to speak out loud. I never trusted the others to understand. But you were different. I read for hours that night. By candlelight wrapped in blankets, I pored over pages of carefully written notes about the forest, the cabin, and something he called the Hollow Archive. He wrote about rare plant specimens growing in the deeper parts of the woods, about indigenous trails, hidden root caves, and mineral veins untouched by modern industry. He mentioned people, academics, conservationists who had once contacted him with interest, but he refused them all. He believed the land needed a guardian, not a developer. And now it was mine. The map showed a section of land marked with a red X about a quarter-mile east of the cabin. It included a sketch trail Grandpa called Whisper Path. The next morning, I laced up my boots and followed the map. It wasn't easy. The path was overgrown, the underbrush thick and wet from recent rain. But my legs remembered the rhythm of the land. I moved like I belonged there, dodging thorns, listening to the birds, noting unfamiliar plants that seemed to match Grandpa's descriptions. And then I found it. At the base of a thick-trunked hemlock tree stood a wooden outbuilding nearly camouflaged by time and nature. Its roof had partially caved in, but the door was intact. I used the key. It clicked softly, one of those deeply satisfying sounds, like something in the universe had just said, yes. Inside, I found shelves of jars, labeled and preserved roots, leaves, bark, samples, dried flowers, binders of field notes, bundles of hand-drawn botanical diagrams. But in the back corner of the structure behind a stack of crates was a trapdoor. I hesitated. Then I opened it. A narrow staircase led down into cool darkness. I descended slowly, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. At the bottom was a stone-lined room, dry and perfectly preserved. The walls were lined with file cabinets, and in the center sat a wooden workbench, still covered in glass slide specimens and microscopes. It was like stepping into a time capsule, and it was all his, all mine. Then I noticed the crates in the corner. Each was labeled with the insignia of the Department of Environmental Protection and marked confidential, unregistered species. I opened one carefully. Inside were plants I didn't recognize. Strange colors, delicate structures, and notes pinned beside each specimen. One was labeled Artemisia CRX with a note that read possible cancer inhibitor, not yet published. Await verification. I sat back on my heels stunned. If this was real, if these plants were truly what Grandpa believed them to be, this wasn't just a hidden archive, it was a biological gold mine, and no one in my family knew about it. Yet. Back at the cabin, I spread the papers and maps across the table. The sun was setting, casting an amber light over everything. My mind spun with questions, possibilities, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. That night, as the wind howled through the trees and the cabin creaked with age, I realized something important. They thought they had pushed me out, given me nothing. But they had unknowingly handed me everything. The next few days passed in a blur of adrenaline and discovery. I spent my mornings exploring the trails marked on Grandpa's map and my afternoons cataloging the findings inside the underground archive. Each folder I opened, each jar I examined, only deepened my awe. This wasn't some hobby-level curiosity. My grandfather had built a meticulous private research facility. A lifetime of study neatly organized and preserved beneath a forgotten shack in the woods. But it wasn't just plants and notes. Tucked into a weathered drawer beneath the workbench, I found correspondence letters between Grandpa Jack and a handful of scientists dated from the late 1970s to the early 2000s. Most were handwritten, a few typed on yellowing paper. And every single one spoke of the same thing: breakthrough potential. There were mentions of peer-reviewed journals interested in publishing his findings. research institutions requesting permission to visit the site, even early drafts of something resembling a patent application for a compound extracted from a rare moss. I could hardly believe what I was reading, but something must have happened. The letters stopped abruptly around 2004. The last one was from a Dr. Lucia Waller, based at a botanical lab in Washington state. It was polite, but urgent. Jack, I understand your desire for privacy. But if you're serious about protecting this discovery, you need to move forward with documentation. Without registration, others can lay claim. Please let me help you before it's too late. He never replied. Or if he did, the response wasn't in the drawer. I leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling of the lab. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the open trapdoor. My mind spun with questions. Why didn't he follow through? Did he change his mind about sharing it with the world, or was he waiting for the right person? And then I remembered the journal, the way he'd written to me directly. Clara, this is yours to protect. Maybe he'd always known I'd come back. Still, something about the abrupt end to the correspondence nagged at me. Grandpa Jack wasn't a man who left things unfinished. If he'd stopped the process, there had to be a reason, and I intended to find out what it was. That evening, I drove into the nearest town, which was little more than a gas station, a diner, and a post office. I stopped at the diner and ordered coffee, then asked the waitress, a silver-haired woman named Helen, if she remembered my grandfather. Jack Bennett, she said, setting down my mug. Of course I do. Came in every Friday for 20 years. Always ordered the meatloaf. Always left a big tip. Good man. Did he ever talk about the land, the cabin? Her smile faded. Only once that I can recall. Said something about wanting to keep it quiet. Said people get greedy when they smell opportunity. Greedy. That word stuck with me. When I asked if she knew anything about a Dr. Waller, she raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah, that lady came through town a couple times in the early 2000s. Folks said she was a professor. Real smart, real serious. She and Jack got into a heated talk one night right there at that table you're sitting at. Then she stopped coming. What was it about? Helen shrugged. I don't eavesdrop, honey. But Jack left upset. Didn't finish his meatloaf. That's how I know it was serious. I thanked her, paid my bill, and drove to the post office next. A younger clerk there helped me track down a forwarding address from Dr. Waller's last known correspondence. She was still at the same lab in Washington state. The next day I emailed her. To my surprise, she responded in less than an hour. Clara, I've waited a long time for this message. Yes, I remember your grandfather well. We spoke often. He was brilliant, cautious, and deeply protective of his research. When he went quiet, I feared the worst. If you found what I think you have, then we need to talk. Immediately. Can we set up a call tomorrow? Lucia Waller, PhD. The call lasted 2 hours. I filled her in on what I'd found, some of it at least. Enough to gain her trust, but not so much that she knew exactly where things stood. She confirmed what I'd suspected. Grandpa Jack had been sitting on something potentially revolutionary. Not just rare plants, but biochemical properties in those plants that had the potential to advance medicine, especially in cancer research and autoimmune disorders. But why didn't he publish, I asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Because he got spooked, she said. He told me people were sniffing around. Said someone in his family had leaked word about the land to outside interests. He didn't know who, but he felt betrayed. He cut off everyone. Even me. I felt my stomach turn cold. Derek. Or Aunt Linda. They'd known he was researching something. Maybe they had tried to get their hands on it and failed. Maybe that was why they were so eager to push me out. They thought the cabin was worthless, and now I was the only one holding the key. I ended the call with Lucia and sat in the quiet of the cabin, heart pounding. All the years I'd spent wondering why my family treated me like an outsider. All the times they'd dismissed me, cut me out, cast me aside. They thought I was weak. They thought I was forgettable. They thought they'd won. But I had the one thing they would never see coming. And they were about to learn that sometimes the forgotten ones are the most dangerous of all. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was racing with possibilities and warnings. If Grandpa Jack had gone silent out of fear, then I couldn't afford to be naive. Whatever he discovered was valuable, potentially life-changing. And where there's value, there's danger. The first thing I did the next morning was drive into town and buy two things: a steel lockbox and a new phone. I'd keep the old one on for now, just to see if Derek or Linda tried to reach out. But from this point forward, my communications and documentation would be separate, protected. I returned to the ranch, packed the most sensitive materials, surveys, annotated notes, lab samples, and locked them in the box, which I then hid beneath a floorboard in the old bedroom closet. Grandpa had installed a false panel there once to hide his hunting rifles. Now it would hide something far more valuable. After securing everything, I drove to a spot with decent reception and called Dr. Waller again. "I think they're going to come for it," I told her. "They will," she said calmly. "The question is, are you ready?" I wasn't. Not yet. But I was going to be. We agreed to keep all communication limited to encrypted email. Lucia promised to help me navigate the next steps: how to quietly file intellectual property claims, how to establish a trust to protect any patents in progress, how to get a professional scientific review without drawing unwanted attention. In the meantime, I made it a priority to clean and inventory every corner of the cabin and underground lab. For the first time in my life, I felt purposeful, powerful. Each night, I'd sit on the porch with Grandpa's old journal in my lap, reading his entries out loud to the trees. It felt like a way of thanking him and reminding myself I wasn't alone. And then on the fifth day, the silence broke. Derek called. I didn't pick up. He called again and again. Finally, I let it go to voicemail. "Clara," his voice said, sounding unusually chipper. "Hey, just checking in. Listen, Jenna and I were talking, and we realized we might have been a little sharp at the reading. That was a tough day, you know. Anyway, we'd love to come up and see the old place, maybe spend the weekend, reminisce a little." I almost laughed. He wasn't checking in. He was fishing. Someone had tipped him off, or maybe he'd caught wind of an old rumor. Either way, he was circling. 2 hours later, Aunt Linda called, then Jenna, then a string of unknown numbers. They were closing in. I called Lucia again. She confirmed my growing suspicion. Someone in the biotech space had started inquiring about an unregistered research site in the southern Appalachian corridor. It was too specific to be a coincidence. "I'm not trying to scare you," Lucia said. "But if someone comes sniffing around, they might not knock on the front door." I needed to make moves fast. First, I set up a shell LLC in my name using Lucia's guidance. The cabin was now leased to a fictitious research nonprofit. Any business inquiries would go through a law office Lucia connected me with in Denver. Then I installed cameras, motion-activated, with cloud storage around the perimeter of the property. One faced the driveway, another watched the trailhead behind the cabin, the third pointed straight at the front door. That same night, as if summoned by the universe itself, a black SUV pulled up the dirt road around 10 p.m. I watched from the shadows of the upstairs window as Derek stepped out. He was wearing his fake smile, the one he used to get out of speeding tickets and into country club events. Jenna stayed inside the car, illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. "Clara," he called loud enough to echo through the trees. "We just want to talk." I didn't answer. I didn't move. They waited 15 minutes. Then they left. The next morning, I woke to 14 missed calls. That's when I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was in control. I drafted an email to Lucia. "They've made contact. I'm implementing full protection protocols. Let's move forward with the sample validation and pre-licensing paperwork." She replied within minutes. "Understood. I'll get the first phase funding proposal ready. We'll submit the provisional patent under the LLC name. You're doing everything right." I stood in the center of the lab and looked around at what I was building, what Grandpa Jack had built for me. For years, I'd believed the lie they told me, that I was weak, forgettable, too soft for real ambition. But I was none of those things. I was quiet. I was underestimated. And now I was about to turn the tables on the people who had written me off. They were still clinging to a fortune that didn't exist, while I stood on the threshold of a discovery the world would soon hear about. And when the time came to tell them, it wouldn't be with bitterness. It would be with a smile. Because the best revenge isn't yelling, it's letting them realize just how much they've lost too late to do anything about it. 3 days after the SUV visit, I received a formal letter delivered by courier from a law firm in Charleston. The letter, stamped and bound in firm language, claimed a family concern regarding inheritance misinterpretation and requested a meeting to discuss the fair reassessment of the will's provisions. In plain English, it meant they wanted to take back what they'd so smugly thrown away. I called Lucia immediately. "They're testing the water," she said, "but that kind of language means they know or suspect there's something of value here." "How do you want me to respond?" I asked. Lucia didn't hesitate. "Ignore it for now. They have no legal standing. And they just made their first mistake." They blinked. Still, the message was clear. They were no longer pretending I didn't exist. I was a problem now, a potential threat, and I was going to become a bigger one. 2 more days passed. On a quiet Saturday morning, I was collecting soil samples in the grove behind the cabin when I saw them, Derek and Jenna, trudging down the driveway with faux casual energy and matching Patagonia vests. Behind them was Aunt Linda in hiking boots far too clean for the terrain. They didn't call first, they didn't knock, they just came. I met them on the porch, arms crossed blocking the door. Behind me, the cabin loomed like a sentry, quiet, ancient, and still holding its secrets. Clara Derrick exclaimed, pretending to be cheerful, "Hey, we were just in the area and thought we'd drop by." Jenna nodded. "We figured you might need some help settling in. You know, fixing things." I gave them nothing. Aunt Linda cut to the point. "Listen," she said, "we've been thinking about Grandpa's will, about how emotional everything was that day. Maybe we didn't act our best." I waited. Derek shifted. "We talked to a lawyer, and it turns out there may be a way to restructure the property arrangement, if you'd be open to it." Jenna smiled in that sugary, poisonous way of hers. "You'd still keep the cabin, of course, but maybe we could manage it together as a family." "Manage what?" I asked flatly. The silence that followed was heavy. They didn't have the words, because they didn't have the truth, only suspicions. I mean, Derek tried again. "We know Grandpa wasn't just camping up here. He was working on something, right?" "It's okay, Clara. We're not mad. We just want to be part of it. We're your family." The word family burned like acid. Family doesn't exile you. Family doesn't mock you in a lawyer's office and send you away with a smile. I stepped back and opened the door, not to invite them in, but to reveal the truth. Inside, on the kitchen table, were the printed results of the preliminary validation tests: the bioluminescent strain, the synthetic protein binder, the growth curve projections, all labeled with a fresh LLC letterhead and notarized stamps. Derek's eyes scanned the papers. Jenna stepped closer. Aunt Linda leaned in her hand, trembling slightly. "What is this?" Derek asked. "It's what you gave up," I said. They didn't speak. I walked over to the side table and picked up a thick envelope, copies of the patent filing, and early-stage licensing offer from a research partner Lucia had brought in from California. I handed it to Derek. "You see," I said calmly, "while you were all dividing up the trust fund and Grandpa's golf clubs, I was inheriting something real, something that matters. And the best part, I didn't have to fight for it. You handed it to me." Aunt Linda's face was pale now. "This can't be legal," she said. "Oh, it's very legal," I replied. "I've got a team behind me now, and unlike you, they actually know what Grandpa was working on. They value it, and they value me." Jenna tried to reach for the documents. I pulled them back. "You've had your chance," I said, voice like stone. "You don't get a second one." Derek opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Go home, or call your lawyer. It won't matter." And then for the first time in my life, I watched all three of them realize what it meant to lose, truly lose. Not just money, but legacy, power, respect, me. They left 15 minutes later, their heads low, their footsteps slower than when they arrived. I stood on the porch long after they were gone, letting the wind wrap around me. It was done. The confrontation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because the truth had finally spoken, and I had spoken with it. That night, as rain fell softly against the cabin roof, I sat by the fire reading through Grandpa Jack's journals again, this time with new eyes. I had won. They had come, they had begged, and I had let them walk away empty-handed. For a moment, I let myself feel proud. But then I reached the very last page of the final notebook, and something stopped me cold. It was a torn, uneven sheet, almost as if it had been ripped out and then hastily stuffed back in. Grandpa's handwriting was rushed, scrawled in thick pen strokes. It read, "If something happens to me, tell Clara to check the old records room. Not everything I found was filed under my name." Underlined 3 times. Old records room. I sat up straight. I'd scoured nearly every inch of the cabin, but there was one place I hadn't dared to touch: the storm cellar. Grandpa always kept it bolted shut with an old iron lock. As a kid, I was warned never to go down there. I grabbed a lantern and the keys from the kitchen drawer. Outside, the wind had picked up. The rain was heavier now, and the trees swayed like they were whispering secrets. I reached the old cellar door behind the cabin and unlocked it. The hinges groaned as I pulled it open. The air was thick, cool, damp, and untouched by time. I stepped down slowly. The cellar wasn't large, but it went deep. The walls were lined with shelves, each packed with labeled boxes, yellowing folders, old lab equipment. In the far corner, behind a stack of rusted tool chests, was a file cabinet, industrial heavy, and sealed with a chain. I cut the chain with bolt cutters I'd brought and pulled open the top drawer. There, under a folder labeled M.R. Holdings, Confidential, I found the missing piece. It wasn't just Grandpa's discovery. It had been part of a military-funded research grant in the late 1970s, one he and 2 other researchers had quietly withdrawn from after ethical disputes arose. The others had gone silent. Grandpa, he had kept going, quietly alone. But here was the real twist. He'd never technically owned the mineral rights to a portion of the land under the cabin, not until 2 years before his death. That land, oddly shaped and barely a few acres wide, had belonged to a dormant energy company. One of the other researchers, presumably. I flipped through notarized transfers' old lease records, and then, at the bottom of the drawer, a letter dated 18 months ago. From the Department of Energy. It was addressed to Grandpa Jack. They knew. Not only about the biotech compound-coated xenofiber 9 in the file, but also about the unique microbial structure that made it ideal for environmental restoration and even next-gen energy storage. It wasn't just a breakthrough. It was a weapon, or a miracle, depending on who got to it first. I stared at the letter, heart pounding. It wasn't a licensing deal. It was a government offer. 7 figures, classified access, conditional ownership, and Grandpa had declined. I sat down, knees weak, as the implications washed over me. The family hadn't just ignored me. They had nearly inherited a landmine. If they'd fought for control and somehow sold the cabin off before I got here, that knowledge could have ended up in the wrong hands. Grandpa knew that. That's why he gave it to me. Not because I was the nice granddaughter or the only one who hadn't betrayed him, but because I was the only one who would protect it. Suddenly, the whole story shifted. The inheritance wasn't punishment. It was preservation. I wasn't the underdog anymore. I was the gatekeeper. The next morning, I emailed Lucia and asked her to schedule an urgent call. We spoke that afternoon. I found something I told her. By the time I finished describing what I'd uncovered, she was silent. "This changes everything," she finally said. "Do we stop the current deal?" I asked. "No," she replied. "We expand it. Quietly. Strategically. And we put you in a position where no one, not the government, not your family, not a biotech firm, can move without your consent." That evening, I drafted a new clause in the licensing proposal. Any usage or sublicensing of the discovery would require my personal approval. No silent investors. No shell company interference. I filed it through Lucia's firm. Within a week, it was accepted. The same day, I received a second letter, this time from a private foundation in Washington, D.C., interested in funding regenerative tech built from naturally occurring organisms. The attached estimate, $22.4 million in seed funding. My hands shook. All those years I spent feeling like background noise in my own family, like a disposable relative, a soft voice in a world of shouters. It had led me here. They had power, but I had purpose. And in the end, purpose lasts longer. It had been 3 weeks since I submitted the revised licensing contract. Every day since then, my inbox had filled with names I never thought I'd see. Executives, lawyers, scientists, journalists. Everyone wanted a piece of what had once been dismissed as that damp little patch of land up in the hills. But not me. I didn't want pieces. I wanted peace. The cabin had changed slowly but meaningfully. I'd refinished the floors with a local carpenter, kept Grandpa's shelves intact, but dusted and labeled, added a modern solar battery, and installed internet just strong enough to handle video calls. It wasn't a tech fortress, it was still a cabin, but now it felt like a command center cloaked in wood and silence. The first check cleared quietly. High 6 figures. The account showed a number so large I stared at it for 15 minutes without blinking. A part of me expected it to vanish if I looked away. But it didn't. It was mine. And I didn't rush to spend it. Instead, I set up 2 funds, one for rural scholarships in Grandpa's name, and another for young women in STEM who'd been underestimated, ignored, or worse, like me. Lucia helped me find a wealth manager who spoke plainly, didn't pitch luxury watches, and understood I didn't want to be anyone's trophy client. By week 4, Forbes and Tech Now had both requested interviews. I declined. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be free. And then the letter came. Not an email, not a text. A letter, handwritten, from Derek. It was addressed formally like a business memo. To Clara, from Derek Carson Rhee, reconciliation. I nearly threw it in the fire. But something made me read it. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. In 3 pages, Derek tried to explain his childhood, his pressure to succeed, his belief that Grandpa always preferred me. He blamed his distance on stress, Jenna's influence, our lack of closeness as cousins. He never once said he was sorry. Instead, he wrote, I think it would be good for the family if we reconnected, especially now that you're in a position to help support everyone's legacy. Legacy. The word struck like a slap. For them, legacy meant money. For me, it meant meaning. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Aunt Linda called next. This time it wasn't to ask, it was to accuse. You've been selfish, Chaoyi said. You didn't even think to ask what your grandfather wanted for the whole family. You're hoarding everything. I'm protecting what he built, I replied. Don't you see? You've become just like him. It was meant as an insult, but it landed as a compliment. By early summer, the first research facility had been approved. A small eco-sustainable lab on the far end of the property, not visible from the cabin. Designed for silence, built for breakthroughs. The team of researchers would live and work on site. A few, like Sarah, had already relocated. She brought her daughter. They baked me cookies last Tuesday. Sometimes I walk through the woods just to breathe and remember that I had survived them all. Every insult, every dismissal, every silence that followed my words like a curtain falling. And now my words built things, contracts, projects, lives. One afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Clara. It was Jenna, not crying, not furious, flat, tired. We're separating, she said. Derek moved out last week. I didn't reply. I know you hate me, she continued. You should. But I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I was cruel. I pushed him to cut ties with you. I thought I was being strong. There was silence. I don't want anything from you, she said finally. I just needed to say it. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, thank you, and hung up. One night after a summer rain, I sat outside with a glass of iced tea and a wool blanket around my shoulders. The wind smelled of pine and wet soil. In the distance, coyotes called to each other. I wasn't just alone. I was whole. Everything that had been taken from me, my confidence, my sense of worth, my place in the family, was no longer missing. I hadn't gotten it back. I had built something else instead, something stronger, not belonging, sovereignty. Lucia called the next morning. 2 new offers, she said. one from a European firm for licensing, another from a private university. You want me to review? Give me the summaries, I said. But tell them I don't rush. They're very eager. They always are, I replied. I looked out the window as she talked past the ridge toward the trail where I used to ride with Grandpa when I was little. Back then, I thought the world ended at that ridge, that everything important happened beyond it. Now I knew better. Sometimes the most powerful places are the quietest. Sometimes the biggest revenge is a life fully lived on your own terms. The air at the edge of the ridge was crisp and dry, the kind that catches in your chest before it softens into your lungs. I stood where the path narrowed facing the west, where the sun dipped low enough to turn the trees bronze. Beneath me stretched the land that once meant nothing to my family, just that old cabin, the place they hoped would disappear with me in it. Now it hummed with quiet work and slow purpose. The research team had made their first presentation last week. Something about thermal soil gradients, untapped geothermal patterns, and a new discovery they wouldn't have made without the land Grandpa left to me. I listened, nodded, and signed the new funding approvals. And then I came here, back to the ridge, where Grandpa used to say, "From here you see who you really are." At 18, I didn't understand what he meant. At 34, I finally did. I used to think being underestimated was a weakness. I thought if people didn't believe in you, you had to scream to be seen. I thought your worth depended on whether they accepted you. I don't believe that anymore. Being underestimated is a kind of armor. They never see you coming. They're too busy ignoring you to notice you building. And when they finally look up, you've already won. Not the way they measure winning, not in property or posts or polished reputations. You win because they can't take anything from you anymore. Not your voice, not your peace, not your place. I didn't destroy my family. They destroyed their chance to know me. When they told me to leave, I listened. When they laughed at the cabin, I said nothing. When they tried to reach out once the money was real and the papers were public, I didn't slam the door. I just didn't open it. Forgiveness doesn't require access. Some things heal best with distance. The community college invited me to speak this fall, a lecture for the geology department. Sarah thinks I should do it. She says young women in science need to see someone like me at the podium, someone who wasn't handed a legacy but made one from the scraps. I told her I'd think about it. Not because I'm afraid to speak, but because sometimes silence is the loudest answer. If you're still listening, maybe you've been in a similar place, cast out, overlooked, written off. Maybe someone told you that you were a burden, a mistake, that you didn't belong. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need permission to build a life. You don't need approval to succeed. And you don't owe anyone the comfort of your silence. Let them call you difficult. Let them call you proud. Let them say you changed. You're supposed to, oh. That's what growth looks like. As the sun dropped behind the trees and the cabin lights flickered on below, I turned back toward home. Home. Not just a word anymore, not just a place, a truth, built slowly, brick by brick, in silence, on my terms. Now tell me, what would you have done in my place? Leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you know someone who's been told they're too much or not enough all their life, send this story to them. Let them know it's never too late to begin again. Never too late to stop surviving and start becoming. Because somewhere quietly waiting in the dark, there's a version of them the world didn't see coming, just like I was. Thank you for listening. Clara.